A week ago, the President of the United States picked up the phone and berated a Republican senator with a torrent of profanity. This wasn't a standard political spat with a member of the opposing party or a heated clash with a reporter. This was an attack on one of his own for the simple crime of voting to rein in his executive authority. At this very moment, something unusual and profoundly serious is unfolding in the corridors of Washington. Republicans are moving against the president quietly and methodically over the most consequential question a nation can face. They are asking whether a president should have unchecked, absolute power to drag this country into a conflict. This isn't just manufactured outrage or a cable news spectacle designed to fill airtime. It isn't a calculated leak meant to dominate a single news cycle before disappearing. What we are witnessing is a group of lawmakers reaching the point where personal loyalty ends and constitutional duty begins. That boundary hasn't just been reached, it has been crossed with historic implications for our republic. What I'm about to lay out isn't easy to follow, and it certainly isn't comfortable to confront. It involves emergency authorities, threats aimed at our closest allied nations, and a president who views every legal limit as a personal betrayal. But stay with me because by the time we're done, you will see exactly what is on the line. This moment may very well shape how presidential power operates in America for generations to come. It's time to look past the headlines and understand the actual machinery of this constitutional brinkmanship. Imagine this scene: it's late in Washington and phones are lighting up across Capitol Hill. Staff members are lowering their voices in crowded corridors while senators stare at their screens in disbelief. They are refreshing their feeds again and again, trying to confirm what they are seeing because it simply doesn't add up. The president isn't attacking Democrats or going after the media today. He is furious at his own party because, for the first time in a long time, they are finally pushing back. I have covered the swamp long enough to know the difference between political theater and actual substance. Most so-called Republican resistance over the past several years has been nothing more than a performance. It's usually a concerned statement here or a furrowed brow there before everyone falls back into line. Then the news cycle moves on and the status quo remains untouched. But what makes this specific moment extraordinary is that Republicans aren't just voicing concern, they are actively legislating against the executive. They aren't using symbolic gestures or empty speeches to make their point this time. They have joined forces with Democrats to push a war powers resolution through the Senate. This is a formal, legal measure designed to limit the president's ability to order military action without Congress's approval. Consider the implications of members of the president's own party looking at his recent actions and deciding they need to act. They concluded they needed to put legal boundaries around this man before something irreversible happens to our country. If you find this deep dive into the survival of our constitutional checks and balances important, make sure to comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you the facts the mainstream media misses. This isn't a mere policy dispute, it is a full-scale constitutional intervention. And how did the president respond to this exercise of legislative power? He didn't call to negotiate, he didn't try to persuade, and he certainly didn't try to mend fences. Instead, he exploded in a way that should concern every American who values the rule of law. He reportedly phoned Senator Susan Collins and unleashed a tirade filled with crude language and intimidation. That reaction speaks volumes about how this administration views the nature of power itself. When a leader meets constitutional limits with anger instead of discussion, it exposes a dangerous mindset. It shows they see power not as something granted by the law, but as something they personally own. They don't see it as a shared responsibility with Congress as our founders intended. It is exactly this mindset, that power is a personal possession, that has sparked this historic revolt. So what exactly set all of this into motion? The details matter because they sound like something out of a political thriller, but they are chillingly real. President Trump has been openly suggesting the idea of using military force to acquire Greenland. I need you to sit with that for a second because it sounds like a joke you'd scroll past on social media. But it isn't a joke. The president has suggested repeatedly that military options are on the table for acquiring territory. This territory belongs to Denmark, which is a NATO ally we are treaty-bound to defend. Senator Chris Murphy spelled this out plainly, and it landed like a shockwave across the international community. Here is what most people don't understand about the foundation of our security, Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. It establishes collective defense, meaning an attack on one member is an attack on all. This is the very foundation that has kept the peace in Europe for over 75 years. Greenland is Danish territory, and if the United States took military action there, we would be attacking our own alliance. Let that sink in for a moment, because this scenario is no longer just a wild theory. Lawmakers are now forced to take this seriously as a terrifying possibility. We are looking at an American president potentially putting us in direct military conflict with Europe. This isn't strategy, it's the kind of rhetoric that in any other era would end a political career overnight. But we don't live in that era anymore, and that is exactly what has Republicans terrified. Once a president starts treating military force like a real estate negotiation tool, the machinery of war begins to turn. It starts to move whether Congress approves of the direction or not. That is why the War Powers Act suddenly matters more than it has in decades. Republicans didn't cross the aisle to make a political statement, they did it to close a door before it's kicked wide open. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand the operating logic inside the president's head. He doesn't think about geopolitics the way most leaders or constitutional scholars do. He doesn't see alliances as mutual commitments or treaties as binding legal obligations. He doesn't see international law as a framework that constrains everyone equally under the sun. Instead, he sees every interaction as a deal where there are only winners and losers. In his worldview, there is only leverage, weakness, properties to acquire, and opponents to dominate. That worldview might work when you're building skyscrapers in Manhattan or pressuring a seller in a boardroom. You can bluff a competitor and walk away from a negotiation only to come back stronger later. But international relations are not real estate, and the stakes are measured in human lives. Countries have militaries, alliances have tripwires, and rhetoric has consequences that cannot be undone with a phone call. When you tell the world military force is on the table for Allied territory, you aren't making a deal. You are issuing a threat that changes the calculations of every ally and adversary involved. Republican senators understand this because many of them sit in classified briefings every single week. They have seen how quickly situations escalate when communication breaks down. They know that words from an American president carry weight that cannot be retracted with a simple tweet. They are scared not because they have suddenly changed their ideology or become liberals overnight. They are scared because they can see exactly where this road leads for our nation. They don't want to be standing there when the consequences of this erratic policy finally arrive. The War Powers Act exists for exactly this kind of moment in our history. It was designed in the aftermath of the Vietnam War to prevent presidents from dragging us into unauthorized conflicts. The law requires the president to consult Congress before committing troops to a fight. It limits military action without congressional approval as a vital emergency brake on executive power. Republicans just pulled that brake because they realized the train was heading off the tracks. Let's return to that phone call with Senator Collins because it offered a glimpse into something much deeper. It wasn't just about a single vote, it was about the president's fundamental interpretation of resistance. When he unleashed that profanity, he revealed that he doesn't see the Senate's independence as democracy at work. He doesn't see it as the system of checks and balances functioning as our founders designed. He sees it as personal treachery and an existential threat to his dominance. This matters because how a leader reacts to being told no tells you everything about their governance. It reveals how they will act when real pressure hits and the stakes are at their highest. The president's entire second-term strategy has been meticulously built around projecting an image of total dominance and inevitability. He wants to be seen as a man who cannot be stopped, cannot be questioned, and certainly cannot be constrained by the traditional rules of the game. Nothing damages that carefully crafted image faster than members of his own party voting against him on national television. So, his response was entirely predictable. It wasn't a call for persuasion or a logical debate, but a raw attempt at intimidation. But here is what truly stood out to the senators watching this unfold. For once, the intimidation simply didn't work. Senator Collins and the other Republicans who crossed the aisle didn't flinch or change their votes after that furious phone call. They absorbed the presidential fury, hung up the phone, and return to the constitutional work they were elected to perform. That specific moment, the failure of intimidation, may prove to be more consequential for our republic than the actual vote itself. It revealed a truth that this administration has never fully accepted: loyalty in American politics is always conditional. It depends on mutual interest, shared national goals, and a perceived benefit to the constituents those senators represent. When a leader stops providing those benefits and begins only to provide risk, the alliance of loyalty begins to disappear. Right now, Republicans on Capitol Hill are doing the math and watching the erratic war rhetoric and emergency declarations. They are asking themselves what they are actually getting from this alliance if the only result is increased national instability. This calculation isn't about ideology, it is a structural assessment of risk versus reward in the face of chaos. While this war powers dispute was raging, the president made another move that signals a deeper shift in strategy. He suddenly declared a national emergency related to Venezuelan oil assets, claiming it was a matter of urgent national security. On the surface, it looks like standard energy policy aimed at safeguarding resources and protecting American consumer interests. But if you look closer at the actual logistics, the timeline for realizing any benefits stretches years or even decades. The infrastructure needed to capitalize on these assets is enormous and cannot be built in a state of emergency. The real winners here aren't American consumers at the pump, but multinational energy corporations seeking a bypass of normal regulations. This is the kind of accountability our nation deserves, so if you want to stay informed on how your government actually operates, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below to join the conversation. So why invoke an emergency declaration if the practical benefits are so far off in the distant future? In American law, a national emergency does something very specific and very dangerous: it centralizes power in the executive branch. It allows a president to bypass normal procedures and shift authority away from the people's representatives in Congress. Emergencies are meant for genuine, imminent crises that demand immediate, decisive action to save lives or the economy. They were never intended to be used as strategic tools to avoid the inconvenience of congressional oversight. Yet, that is exactly the pattern we are seeing emerge from this White House every time scrutiny intensifies. Every time Congress starts asking uncomfortable questions, the temperature is intentionally raised and a new emergency is suddenly declared. The conversation is forced to shift from accountability for past actions to the management of a fresh, manufactured crisis. This isn't a random series of events, it is a deliberate strategy to flood the zone and change the subject. When everything is labeled an emergency, nothing gets examined closely, and last week's scandals fade from the public view. I have seen this playbook in action for years, and we are seeing it again with the Venezuelan oil declaration. It isn't really about the oil, it's about keeping the gears of government so consumed with crisis response that they stop functioning. It's about ensuring that the slow, unglamorous work of accountability never actually reaches its final destination in the light of day. But while the headlines are screaming about war and emergencies, a quieter and subtler pressure is building behind the scenes. This pressure may prove to be more consequential than any of the public showdowns we see on cable news. I'm talking about the mundane procedural machinery that ensures government accountability: document tracking, timelines, and statutory deadlines. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has been quietly asking precise, targeted questions that have the administration's lawyers working overtime. He isn't throwing out wild accusations, he is simply asking why promised documents have been delayed for months. He is asking why review timelines have stretched endlessly and why legal deadlines have slipped by without any explanation. These aren't partisan attacks, they are inquiries about the basic process of a functioning and transparent democratic government. Process is exactly what this administration fears the most because process creates a permanent and undeniable paper trail. When a senator makes a fiery speech, it's often just political theater that changes very little in the long run. But when a senator starts asking about Inspector General compliance and chains of documentation, the game changes entirely. Paper trails don't care about political loyalty or the popularity of a president at a campaign rally. Records are stubborn things that sit in filing cabinets and on secure servers waiting for a lawful subpoena. The administration itself framed many of its previous disclosures as being urgent, transparent, and coming to the public soon. However, the reality of the execution has moved far more slowly than the lofty promises suggested to the American people. When the gap between rhetoric and execution becomes this visible, the credibility of the entire executive branch suffers. Once that credibility is gone, every future explanation from the White House faces deeper and more justified skepticism. This is the trap the president is desperately trying to avoid by declaring new emergencies and raising the stakes. A request for an inspector general review isn't a declaration of war, it's an acknowledgement that the process is failing. Whether it's through mismanagement or competing priorities, the public has a right to know why the system isn't working. But for a president who views every inquiry as a personal attack, even neutral oversight feels like an act of warfare. This is the fundamental danger because oversight isn't an optional part of our system, it is how power is held accountable. When a leader treats the rule of law as an enemy, the entire foundation of our system starts to shake. Republican senators are finally realizing that this isn't just about one man or even one single four-year term. They are worried about the institution of the Senate and what happens to our country when this president is gone. Constitutional norms do not automatically repair themselves once they have been broken by a powerful executive. Precedents set by one president today become the standard tools for the next president tomorrow. If we allow a president to bypass Congress through manufactured emergencies now, we lose the right to complain later. Our democracy only stays strong when people like you stay engaged, so please subscribe to this channel and share this video to help others understand what's at stake for the future of the United States. We must pull these high-level constitutional debates down from the realm of abstraction because this power struggle has real consequences for real American families. When a president treats military force as a personal tool for land acquisition, our men and women in uniform are the ones who feel the immediate weight of that rhetoric. They are the ones who get deployed to unnecessary conflicts and they are the ones who may never come home to their loved ones. This isn't just a game of political chess played in Washington, it is a life-and-death reality for those who hold the line for our freedom. Our military deserves a leadership that views war as a final, somber resort rather than a first-option negotiation tactic. The economic stability of every American worker is also being gambled with in this erratic approach to foreign policy. When trade relationships and long-standing alliances are destabilized by unpredictable threats, factory orders get cancelled and supply chains begin to fracture across the globe. We are seeing a world where allies lose trust in American commitments, causing the dollar to weaken and our security agreements to fray at the edges. None of this is abstract because when the government becomes unpredictable, it is the ordinary citizens who pay the ultimate price for the chaos. The Republican revolt we are witnessing is about more than just limiting one man's authority, it is about safeguarding the predictability that allows everyday life and business to function. If you believe that our leaders must be held to a higher standard of stability and truth, please join our community by subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment below with your take on this crisis. The talk of military force against Denmark to acquire Greenland is more than just an international embarrassment for the United States. It forces our European allies to question whether they can still count on the shield of American protection in an increasingly dangerous world. This erosion of trust builds slowly, relationship by relationship, until one day we find our nation isolated in ways we never anticipated. Furthermore, the weaponization of emergency powers creates massive economic distortions that throw our domestic markets off balance. When emergency declarations are used for political goals rather than genuine crises, investments are misdirected and the economy begins to serve politics instead of the people. The reality of our constitutional norms is that once they are shattered, they do not automatically repair themselves when a new administration takes the oath of office. Precedents set by one president today become the standardized tools for the next president to use, potentially in even more aggressive ways. If we allow the current executive to treat oversight as sabotage and intimidate lawmakers who dissent, that playbook becomes available to anyone who follows him. Republicans who have spent decades in Washington understand this accumulation of power all too well. They know that defending a president today could mean empowering a future leader they cannot control and do not agree with. This calculation is exactly what is driving the current revolt in the Senate because lawmakers are realizing the institution itself is at risk. They are asking whether Congress will even matter 10 years from now if these precedents go unchallenged by the people's representatives. Once a president convinces themselves that their actions are guided solely by personal judgment rather than the law, the office of the presidency changes forever. It stops being a position within a balanced system and starts becoming the system itself, unchecked and unencumbered. This is the fundamental transformation that a growing minority of Republicans are now trying to prevent with their votes and their voices. To understand where this goes next, there are 5 critical signs you need to watch as this story develops. First, keep a close eye on the War Powers Resolution and whether it can maintain enough support to survive a presidential veto. If it passes, it signals that Congress is finally reclaiming the authority it has allowed to erode for far too many decades. Second, watch the progress of oversight requests, Inspector General inquiries, and the fulfillment of document subpoenas. If these processes are allowed to function despite the pressure, it proves that the institutional machinery of our government is still alive. Third, we must watch the Republican coalition to see if the minority of senators pushing back begins to grow or if they remain isolated. If that group expands, the president's leverage over his own party will continue to weaken significantly. Fourth, listen to the president's language because when he feels cornered, he historically escalates with more emergency declarations and harsher rhetoric. The greater the pressure from the Senate, the more extreme his reactions are likely to become in the coming weeks. Finally, watch what happens to the specific people who had the courage to say no, like Senator Susan Collins. The fate of these dissenters will reveal whether resistance is a viable path or if the incentive structure of modern politics has shifted toward total submission. This story isn't just about one man, it is about whether the rules that govern power are stronger than the individuals who temporarily hold that power. Every democracy eventually faces a moment where a leader emerges who believes the rules simply do not apply to them. When that happens, the system faces a choice: it can bend, it can break, or it can choose to hold the line. Right now, we are watching the American system get tested in real time by the pressure of these emergency powers and military threats. The boundaries are responding, perhaps not as firmly as many would hope, but the system is pushing back against the overreach. When inspectors general receive requests and senators ask uncomfortable questions, the constitutional process is working exactly as it was intended to work. History is full of warnings about democracies that tolerated small violations until large-scale abuses of power became the routine. But systems endure when people choose to make them endure by putting their oaths of office above their political careers. None of this happens automatically. It requires the constant choice of lawmakers, institutions, and most importantly, the citizens who demand accountability. The revolt is real, the weaponization of emergencies is a deliberate strategy, and the precedents being set today will outlive this presidency. We are at a moment that goes far beyond any single personality or any one election cycle in our history. The core question remains: can the American system constrain a leader who doesn't believe he should be constrained? Democracy does not defend itself, it depends on people playing their part and holding their piece of the line against the tide of power. The resistance is now coming from within the party, from people who have decided that some lines simply cannot be crossed. Choices matter, and individuals in the right moment have the power to change the direction of national events for the better. We are in that kind of moment right now, where the future depends on whether we believe the rules still matter more than the individual. Power must be constrained by the law, it must be used for the public good, and it must never be treated as a personal possession. I will continue to follow this story as it develops because the stakes for our republic are too high to ignore. Thank you for your time, for your attention, and for your commitment to the truth in an era of chaos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your comment below on whether you think the Republican revolt will hold or if party loyalty will win the day.